Sirens wrapped around the Gardner Expressway like a noose, and Elise Whitfield knelt on broken glass with her hands pressed against a stranger's chest, counting compressions under her breath while the man beside her reloaded a gun he wasn't supposed to know how to use. 6 months earlier, she'd been the kind of person who apologized to chairs when she bumped into them. Now her hands didn't shake. That was the part that frightened her most. The rain that November had a particular Toronto cruelty to it. Thin, cold, relentless, the kind that turned Bloor Street into a river of black umbrellas and made the inside of Robarts' library smell like wet wool and burnt coffee from the vending machine on the 3rd floor. Elise had claimed the same carol for 2 years, tucked against the concrete wall where the Wi-Fi was strongest and the noise was weakest, and she guarded it the way other students guarded parking spots. Midterms had emptied every other seat in the building by 10 p.m., but Robarts at that hour still held the particular hum of people who had nowhere better to be. She was 23, in her 2nd year of the paramedicine program at Centennial, and her body had stopped negotiating with exhaustion months ago. Her mother had died the previous January, ovarian cancer, 11 weeks from diagnosis to the funeral home on Danforth, and Elise had gone back to class 9 days later because grief, she'd discovered, didn't pause for anyone, and neither did anatomy exams. She wasn't poor. Her mother had left her the house in the Beaches paid off, and a modest amount in savings that meant Elise didn't lie awake doing the math other students did. She worked 4 shifts a week at a diner near campus, not because she had to, but because the noise of other people's small problems, burnt toast, a missing pickle, a customer who wanted his eggs, more done but not too done, that gave her something to hold on to that wasn't her own house, suddenly far too quiet. What she didn't have anymore was anyone who asked how her day was, and actually waited for the answer. The man at the end of the long study table had been there for 3 nights running. She'd noticed him the way you notice furniture, present, unobtrusive, slightly out of place. He wore a charcoal peacoat that looked too expensive for a university library, and he never seemed to actually read the textbook open in front of him. His eyes moved instead, slow circuits around the room, the doors, the stairwell. Elise had clocked that kind of watchfulness before, in the waiting room during her clinical placements. It was the look people got when they were braced for something. She gathered her books at 10:30, her arms aching, and walked the length of the table without entirely meaning to. "Mind if I sit here? Everywhere else smells like energy drinks and bad decisions." He looked up, dark eyes, a stillness to his face that wasn't quite calm so much as controlled. "Free country," he said, and went back to not reading his textbook. "Elise," she said, dropping into the chair across from him. "Dant." She didn't ask him anything else that first night, too tired to perform small talk, and he didn't offer. But she came back the next evening, and the one after that, and somewhere in the 2nd week it stopped being an accident and started being a habit, neither of them named out loud. He brought her a coffee, once black, the way she took it, without asking, which should have unsettled her, and instead made something in her chest loosen for the first time in months. What Elise didn't know, what she had no reason to suspect, sitting in a library with a stranger who remembered her coffee order, was that Dante Riley wasn't a student. He was 26, 4 years out of a juvenile system that had chewed him up and spat him into the only family that had ever offered him steady work. The Doyle crew, an outfit that ran the West End docks and half the construction permits north of the 401. He'd been put into the campus under a fabricated transcript and a burner identity, ostensibly to let the heat die down after a warehouse dispute on the Etobicoke waterfront had left 2 of Connor Doyle's rivals in the hospital. In reality, Dante had been told to keep his eyes open. Doyle's people had heard a rumor, old, half-mythical, passed down like a ghost story among the city's crime families, that Vincent Moretti, the man who controlled nearly every shipping contract moving through the port of Toronto, had a daughter nobody had ever seen. A civilian. A secret kept so carefully that even Moretti's own capos weren't certain she existed. Dante had clocked the 2 men by the reference section on his 4th night in the library. Mid-50s. Overcoats too heavy for the weather, the unmistakable economy of movement that came from men who got paid to notice things before they happened. He recognized one of them, Marco Vitale, a long-time fixer for the Moretti organization, a man whose presence anywhere usually meant something worth protecting was nearby. Dante's hand had drifted towards the small of his back out of pure instinct before he registered that Vitale wasn't watching him. He was watching the girl 2 seats down, the one in the oversized cardigan, highlighting a paragraph about cardiac arrhythmias with the single-minded focus of someone trying to outrun her own thoughts. It took him another 4 days of careful, deniable conversation to put it together. The dead mother who'd been a nurse, the father who'd died before she was born, a story so threadbare it practically had Moretti's fingerprints on it. The house in the beaches that Elise mentioned once, almost embarrassed, had been a gift from an old family friend when her mother got sick. Dante sat across the table from Elise Whitfield and understood, with the particular cold clarity of a man whose life depended on reading rooms correctly, that he was looking at Vincent Moretti's only child. He should have reported it that night. Instead, he found himself walking her to the streetcar stop on Spadina, talking about nothing. Her clinical rotations, the diner's terrible coffee maker, the way Lake Ontario looked grey and endless from the Toronto Islands ferry in the winter, a place she said she went sometimes just to be somewhere her mother used to take her as a kid. He told himself it was reconnaissance. He stopped believing that around the 3rd week. "You're quiet tonight," Elise said, one evening in late November, the two of them walking past the Batter Shoe Museum with their collars up against the wind. "Quieter than usual, I mean, which is saying something." "Long week. You always say that." She bumped his shoulder with hers, an easy, unthinking gesture that made his jaw tighten. "You know you've never once told me what your major actually is. Boring stuff. You wouldn't be impressed. Try me. I diagnose stomach flu for a living right now. My bar is low." He almost told her the truth then. Not the whole of it, but enough, some thinned-down version that might have given her a head start. He didn't. The words sat in his throat like stones, and instead he said something about logistics. Half a lie wrapped around a true word, and watched her accept it because she had no reason not to. That was the night Connor Doyle summoned him. The meeting happened in a freight warehouse off Lake Shore Boulevard, the air thick with the smell of diesel and cold concrete, forklifts silent in their bays like sleeping animals. Doyle sat at a folding table with a laptop and a manila folder, flanked by 2 men Dante had never liked and trusted even less. Doyle himself was lean, sharp-featured, the kind of man whose calm was more dangerous than other men's rage. "Sit," Doyle said, and Dante sat. "We got a name, Moretti's kid." Doyle flipped the folder open, slid a photograph across the table, Elise walking out of Robarts in her blue Centennial College hoodie, a textbook clutched to her chest. In the corner of the frame, blurred but unmistakable, was Dante. "Funny thing is, we already had eyes on her, through you. You've been sitting with her for a month, Rayleigh, and you never thought to mention you'd found Moretti's ghost?" Dante kept his face still through sheer force of habit. "I wasn't sure. Didn't want to bring you a maybe." "Well, it's not a maybe anymore." Got it confirmed through a contact at Vital Stats. The birth record sealed under a court order Moretti bought 20 years ago. Her mother made him swear to keep her out of the life. Sweet story. Doyle's mouth curled. "We're going to use her to end this war before it starts costing us the port contracts. We grab her tomorrow night. We sit her down somewhere quiet, and we call her father. He signs the shipping lanes over to us, or his little girl comes home in a box, 1 piece at a time, until he gets the message." "She doesn't know any of this," Dante said, and hated how careful his voice sounded. "She thinks her father was a truck driver who died in an accident. Don't care what she thinks. I care what Moretti thinks when he hears his daughters screaming on the phone." Doyle leaned back. "You're already inside. Tomorrow night, you get close, you keep her calm, you walk her somewhere quiet near the island's ferry terminal. Vitale's detail runs light on weeknights. Just him and 1 other guy. We roll up, we put Vitale down, we take the girl. You do this clean, Riley. You're not running numbers anymore. You're made." Dante left the warehouse with the wind off the lake cutting through him like it was trying to get to something underneath his skin. He didn't go home. He walked, for almost 2 hours, through the distillery district's empty cobblestone streets, past shuttered galleries and string lights swaying in the cold, trying to find a version of the next 24 hours that didn't end with Elise Whitfield's blood on somebody's hands. He didn't find one. What he found instead, somewhere around the second hour, was the plain, unmanageable fact that he wasn't willing to let it happen, whatever it cost him. He found her the next evening exactly where he knew she'd be, on the Toronto Island's ferry, the last crossing before the terminal closed for the night, standing at the rail with a paper cup of cider going cold in her hands, watching the city skyline recede into a smear of light against the dark. She came here sometimes after a hard shift, she'd told him once, somewhere her mother used to bring her. "You look terrible," she said when he approached, the wind whipping a strand of hair across her face. "Long week, round 2, Elise." He took her by the shoulders more firmly than he meant to and watched her smile collapse. "We need to go now." "What, why?" "You're hurting my arm." "I'm sorry." He loosened his grip but didn't let go, his eyes already scanning the near-empty deck, the dock ahead where the ferry was angling in. 50 meters off, leaning against a lamppost with a cigarette he wasn't smoking, was Vitale. Moretti's watchdog, exactly where Dante knew he'd be. "You're scaring me," Elise said, pulling back, real fear sliding into her voice now. "What is going on with you? I keep seeing the same people everywhere I go. Those men from the library, I swear one of them followed me to the diner last week. Am I losing my mind?" "You're not losing your mind." His voice shook, just slightly, just enough. "Elise, there are things about your life, your family, that you don't know. I should have told you weeks ago. I was a coward." Before he could say anything else, a black SUV came around the corner of the terminal lot too fast, headlights dark, tires screaming against wet pavement. "Down!" Dante shouted, and the side door of the SUV was already sliding open. 3 men in balaclavas spilling out with weapons raised, and across the lot Vitale dropped his unlit cigarette and was moving, drawing a heavy revolver from beneath his coat with a speed that defied his bulk. Elise screamed as the first shots tore through the ferry terminal's glass windbreak, and Dante threw himself over her, taking them both down behind the iron base of a dock piling as the night exploded into noise. For the next 90 seconds, the world narrowed to muzzle flashes and the smell of cordite over lake water. Vitale advanced rather than retreated, his revolver bucking in his hand, and the first round caught the SUV's driver clean through the windshield, sending the vehicle slewing sideways into a concrete barrier. Dante drew a pistol. Elise hadn't known he was carrying and fired twice, a clean double tap that dropped one of the masked men where he stood. And in that single unbearable second, Elise understood, with the lurch of someone watching their entire understanding of a person collapse in real time, that the boy who brought her coffee was no boy at all. "Stay down," he barked, and the voice belonged to a man who'd done this before, who knew the rhythm of it the way she knew the rhythm of a code blue. A round clipped the piling beside Vitale, sending a chip of stone into his shoulder. He staggered, blood blooming dark through his coat, and went down behind an overturned bench. Dante grabbed Elise's arm. "When I move, you get to him and you keep him from bleeding out. You know how. I know you know how. I don't even know who that man is. He's your father's man, and right now he's the only reason we're still breathing. Go." Something in her, something she would spend the next several days trying to name, simply obeyed. She crossed the open ground on her knees, sliding in beside Vitale, ripping her scarf free, and pressing it hard against the wound below his collarbone, her hands moving with a steadiness that belonged to someone who had spent 2 years training for exactly this, and 1 terrifying minute discovering it actually worked under fire. Vitale's eyes found her face, glassy with shock. "Miss Moretti," he rasped. "Don't talk. Hold still." Her voice came out flatter and harder than she'd ever heard it. The remaining attackers broke off as sirens rose in the distance, abandoning their dead, scrambling back toward a second vehicle idling near the parking structure. Dante hauled Vitale up by his good arm with Elise bracing his other side, and the three of them half-carried, half-dragged the bleeding man to a black Suburban parked along the access road. Vitalil's own vehicle, the keys tossed to Dante with a blood-slick hand. They peeled out of the terminal lot moments before the first cruisers arrived, merging onto the Gardner with the lake a black smear behind them. The ride west was silent except for Vitali's ragged breathing and the hum of the heater. Elise sat in the back with her hands red to the wrist, staring at the back of Dante's head, watching pieces assemble themselves into a shape she didn't want. "Who is my father?" she said. Not a question. A demand spoken so quietly it barely disturbed the air. Vitali's eyes were closed, his head tipped against the window. "Vincent Moretti," he said, each word costing him something. "Runs the port. Runs half the city if you ask the wrong people. Your mother made him swear the day you were born that you'd never know any of it. He bought a judge to seal your birth record. I've watched you since you were small enough to ride a tricycle on the boardwalk, kid. Never once got close. That was the deal." Elise felt something go very still and very cold inside her, a sensation she recognized distantly from clinical rotations. The moment a patient's vitals crashed and the body simply, efficiently, stopped wasting energy on panic. She thought of her mother humming in the kitchen, of the house in the beaches she'd assumed was simply the product of careful saving, of every quiet, careful lie that had built the floor she'd been standing on her whole life. It wasn't grief exactly. It was the recognition of grief's shape in something entirely new. "And you," she said, lifting her eyes to the mirror, finding Dante's there. "Were you watching me since I was small enough for a tricycle too?" His knuckles whitened on the wheel. "No, I work for Connor Doyle. I was put in that library to find Moretti's weak point. You were supposed to be a name in a file." His voice roughened. "I didn't tell them I'd found you. Not for 3 weeks. I should have walked away the first night, and instead I kept coming back. And I am telling you the truth now, because I'd rather lose everything than let what almost happened tonight happen again. You lied to me for a month." The words came out steady, which somehow made them worse. Every coffee, every walk home, all of it. Most of it wasn't a lie. He didn't look away from the road, but his voice cracked at the edges. "I never lied about the part where I—" He stopped himself. "Doesn't matter right now. What matters is Doyle thinks I'm bringing you to him tonight. When he realizes I'm not, there's no version of my life that survives that." I did it anyway. She didn't answer for a long time. When she finally spoke, it wasn't forgiveness, and it wasn't fury either. It was something colder and more practical, a version of herself she didn't entirely recognize speaking through her mouth. "Pull over." "Elise, we're not safe yet," I said. "Pull over." He did, easing the Suburban into an empty loading dock beneath a stretch of warehouses near the rail yards, the engine idling, exhaust curling white in the cold. He turned in his seat, half expecting her to bolt, to scream, to demand he let her out into the night and away from all of it. Instead, she sat very still, looking down at the blood drying on her own hands. Vital's blood, a stranger's blood. The first physical proof that the world she'd been living in for 23 years had simply been a story someone else had written for her. She didn't cry. She found distantly that she didn't especially want to. "I need a day," she said finally, "not to forgive you. Not yet. I don't even know if that's the right word for what I'm going to feel about you in a week. But I need a day to understand what just happened before I decide what to do about it. Can you give me that?" "Yes," Dante said, and meant it more than he'd meant anything in years. The day became 2. Elise didn't go to class. She sat in her mother's kitchen in the beaches with the curtains drawn, turning the new shape of her own history over and over, and somewhere, in the second long, sleepless night, the fear started to burn down into something else. Not courage exactly. Not yet. But the cold clarity of someone who had run 100 trauma scenarios in her head during clinical training and understood, finally, that this was simply another one, larger and stranger, but governed by the same basic rule. Panic gets people killed, and someone in the room has to stay calm enough to act. She thought of her grandfather, the one who'd taught her to shoot clay pigeons off the dock at the cottage in Muskoka every August of her childhood, patient and exacting, telling her that fear was only information, not an instruction. She hadn't thought about those summers in years. She thought about them now. By the third day, she called Dante and told him to take her to her father. The Moretti estate sat behind a stand of old pines north of the city, near King City, a stretch of stone and glass that looked more like an embassy than a house. When the Suburban pulled up to the gatehouse, a dozen armed men surrounded the vehicle within seconds. Weapons trained until Vitale, bandaged, pale but alive, leaned out the passenger window and barked something in a tone that made every gun lower at once. Vincent Moretti met her in a study that smelled of leather and good scotch. A man in his late 50s with silver at his temples and the kind of stillness that made grown men go quiet when he entered a room. Whatever that stillness was built from, it cracked the moment he saw her. "Elise," he said, and her name in his mouth sounded foreign and old, like something he'd been rehearsing for 20 years. "Don't." She held up a hand, and to her own astonishment he stopped. "My mother is dead. You let her raise me on a lie so good I never once questioned it. And 3 nights ago I nearly died because of who I turn out to be. The story's over. I need you to understand that the girl you've been keeping safe from a distance doesn't exist anymore." His eyes moved past her to Dante, standing near the door, and went hard with a different kind of rage. "And this? A Doyle boy? In my house? He's the reason I'm alive," Elise said, stepping between them, and the words came out steadier than she felt. "And he's the reason we're going to end this. Tonight." It took her father a long moment to look at her properly. Not as the ghost of the nurse he'd loved and lost 23 years earlier, but as someone new. Someone built partly from his blood and partly from 2 years of memorizing the body's failure points, who had just spent 3 days deciding, deliberately, not to fall apart. Dante laid out everything he knew. Doyle's transit routes, the blind spots in his security, the penthouse near the harbourfront where he actually slept, the warehouse that was a fortress everywhere except the one loading exit nobody guarded properly on Thursdays. For 2 hours the study became a war room, Elise asking questions with a clinician's precision. Timing, exposure, fallback positions, surprising even herself with how naturally the structure of triage mapped onto the structure of an ambush. "Absolutely not," her father said when she told him the plan, that she would be the bait. Parked in plain sight in a decoy car near Doyle's warehouse, drawing him out into the open. "I am not putting you back in front of a gun." "I'm already in front of one," she said. "Doyle doesn't stop wanting me just because I go home and lock the door. The only way this ends is if the man who wants me stops existing. You taught me that, even from a distance. I'm just the one saying it out loud." At 3 in the morning, Elise sat in the back of an unmarked town car parked in a service alley 2 blocks from Doyle's warehouse, a Kevlar vest hidden under a borrowed coat, her pulse a steady, controlled thing in her throat. Dante sat beside her, a carbine across his knees, his jaw tight. "Whatever happens tonight," he said quietly, not looking at her, "I'm not sorry I sat down at your table that first night. I'm sorry for everything that came after it, but not for that." She reached over and put her hand on his arm, the gesture small and deliberate. "We finish this, then you can apologize properly." Dante dialed a number from a burner phone. Doyle picked up on the second ring, his voice already sharp with suspicion. "You have 30 seconds, really, to tell me why 2 of my men are dead and you're not. I've got her, Connor." Dante's voice came out rough, frightened, convincingly so. "Vitale lost it, started shooting everything that moved. I grabbed her in the chaos. I'm pinned down 2 blocks from the warehouse. Moretti's people are sweeping the grid. I need an extraction now, or we both lose the only leverage we've got." A pause, long enough to feel dangerous. Then greed did what greed always did. "Keep her quiet. I'm coming myself." 20 minutes later, 4 black SUVs rolled out of the warehouse's underground exit, Doyle's own car at the center of the formation. As the convoy turned onto the narrow access road toward the alley, a city sanitation truck reversed violently out of a side street, T-boning the lead vehicle and sealing the road. From the rooftops above, Moretti's men opened fire in a coordinated, merciless sweep that lasted less than 3 minutes. Elise watched it through the tinted glass of the town car, with her hands folded tightly in her lap, feeling something she hadn't expected to feel. Not triumph, not even relief, but a kind of grim, settled stillness. The same stillness she'd feel years later standing over a patient she'd finally managed to stabilize after a long, ugly call. By the time the sun came up over the lake, the Doyle crew no longer controlled a single block of the harbor front, and the city, mostly, never knew a war had happened at all. A month later, Elise stood on the balcony of a condo overlooking the lake, the late autumn wind sharp enough to sting, watching the lights of the Toronto Islands ferry cut a slow path across the dark water. She'd finished her semester, after all 2 weeks behind everyone else, catching up nights in a library that no longer felt like the place she used to disappear into. She still worked the occasional shift at the diner, mostly because she liked the noise, though her co-workers had started joking that she carried herself differently now. Steadier, somehow, like she'd stopped flinching at things. The glass door slid open behind her. Dante stepped out, a sharp dark coat replacing the worn peacoat she'd first seen him in, moving the way a man moves when he no longer has to watch every door in a room. "Your father called," he said, coming to stand beside her at the rail. "The port contracts are settled. Doyle's territory's been absorbed quietly. Nobody's going to come looking for either of us." "Good," she said, and took a slow sip from the mug in her hands. Not bourbon, just tea, because some things about her hadn't changed and she'd decided she didn't want them to. She studied the man beside her, the one who had lied to her, bled for her, and ultimately helped her find solid ground inside a life that had collapsed out from under her in a single week. And the library, robots. Did it survive me skipping a month of exams in it? Better than that. He almost smiled. There's a scholarship fund starting up in your mother's name, full-ride paramedicine program every year. Nobody touches it. Not Doyle's people. Not anyone. Something in Elise's chest, hardened over the past month into something she hadn't fully named yet, loosened just slightly at that. Not back into the soft, unguarded shape it used to be, but into something new, something that could hold both the grief and the steadiness at once. She reached over and laced her fingers through his, the gesture quiet, deliberate, the way she did everything now. She wasn't the girl who'd asked a stranger if she could sit at his table anymore. She was something else steadier, harder around the edges, still capable of warmth, but no longer naive about what that warmth could cost. And here, on a balcony above a city that had tried to take everything from her in a single week, she had finally found someone worth sitting with, no matter what it had taken to get there.